Ever feel like some days your decisions are, on point, and other days, not so much?
Definitely. We all have those days.
We'll get this. There's this whole book called Noise by Kahneman, Sibony, and Sunstein. It's about how randomness, sneaks into our judgment.
Yeah, and it can happen even when we think we're being super objective.
Totally. So let's dive in, right? What exactly is this noise thing they're talking about?
Well, think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to hit a target. Okay.
Okay, got it.
Now, bias is like consistently hitting the same spot on that target, but like off-center.
So you're always wrong in the same way.
Right. But noise is different. It's like your shots are scattered all over the place,
Oh, I see. So it's unpredictable, inconsistent.
Exactly.
Interesting. So it's not just about being wrong. It's about being wrong in, random different ways each time.
You got it.
Yeah.
And the book uses this example of trying to stop a stopwatch at exactly 10 seconds.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. Apparently, almost no one can do it consistently, right?
Nope. Some tries you're fast, some you're slow, and there's no real pattern to it. It's all over the place.
So even simple things like that can be affected by noise. That's kind of wild.
It is. And what's even more wild is that this isn't just limited to games or experiments.
Oh, no. Like what?
Well, think about college admissions, for example. Two students, equally qualified, they both go for interviews on different days.
Okay. Yeah.
Now imagine one walks out into beautiful sunshine, right? And the other one gets soaked in a downpour.
Oh, no.
Yeah, research suggests that even something like the weather could affect an admission officer's decision.
Whoa, seriously. So my chances of getting into Harvard could have been doomed by a rain cloud.
Maybe, maybe not. But it does make you think.
All right.
And this isn't just about college admissions either. We see this in loan approvals, medical diagnoses, even legal judgments.
Wait, hold on. Our justice system, which is supposed to be all about fairness and being objective, you're saying that's vulnerable to this noise too?
Absolutely. The book talks about this idea of occasion noise, where the same judge, looking at the same case but on a different day, might make a totally different decision.
Wow. That's a little scary, to be honest.
It is.
So before we spiral into an existential crisis here, can we back up a sec? How is this noise different from bias? Don't people use those words interchangeably sometimes?
Yeah, they do, but the book makes a clear distinction. Remember the target example?
Yeah, the one with the scattered shots.
Right. Bias is hitting that same spot off-center every time. Noise is the scatter, the lack of any predictable pattern.
Got it. So bias is more like a systematic error, while noise is all about randomness.
Precisely.
Okay, so they're different. But can they, work together somehow?
Actually, yeah, they can. Bias can actually make the noise problem even worse.
Really? How so?
Well, the book talks about immigration courts where the rates of granting asylum varied wildly depending on the judge.
Oh, wow. That's a big difference.
It is, and it suggests that the judge's individual biases might actually be creating noise throughout the whole system.
So you're saying that even in systems that are designed to be impartial, individual biases can actually create a whole other level of noise. That's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is. But here's what I don't get. If this noise is such a big deal, why aren't we more aware of it? Why do we seem to just ignore it?
Well, think about it this way. Humans are storytellers.
True. We love a good narrative.
We do. We crave those clear cause and effect explanations for things. But noise, by definition, is random.
Right. Unpredictable.
Right. It just doesn't fit into those neat little stories we like to tell ourselves.
So we just kind of gloss over it, pretend it's not there?
Pretty much. It's easier to miss it completely, or sometimes we even mistake it for bias because bias at least fits a narrative.
So we're basically hardwired to look for patterns even when they might not actually be there, which means this noise thing is even sneakier than I thought.
It is sneaky.
So what do we do about it? Are we just doomed to make noisy judgments forever?
Not necessarily. The book actually offers a few glimmers of hope. Have you ever heard of the wisdom of crowds?
Yeah, I think so. Isn't it the thing about how, a group of people guessing something can be more accurate than one expert?
Exactly. Remember that story about Francis Galton and the ox weighing contest?
Oh, yeah. The average of everyone's guesses was, shockingly close to the ox's real weight.
Right. And that's because all those individual errors, they basically canceled each other out.
So more perspectives, less noise.
Exactly. Averaging multiple independent judgments can get us closer to the truth.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we apply that? Like in real life, how do we get more perspectives?
Well, that's where things get a little trickier. The book does give a few warnings about when this wisdom of crowds thing doesn't work so well.
Like what?
Well, first, those judgments need to be truly independent. No groupthink allowed.
Makes sense. We need diverse opinions, not just an echo chamber.
Right. And everyone needs to be looking at the same information. No comparing apples to oranges.
Okay, so no skewed data, everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And the other thing is, we got to be careful about shared biases.
Ah, right. Even if we average a bunch of judgments, if everyone has the same blind spot, we're just going to amplify that bias.
You got it. So averaging judgments can be a really powerful tool, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right, we got to use it wisely. So besides crowdsourcing our decisions, what else can we do to fight this noise? The book mentions something called a noise audit, right?
Yep, that's one of the first steps, making the noise visible.
Okay, how do we do that?
Well, a noise audit is basically a way to measure the level of inconsistency in a system. Let's say we're looking at judges' sentencing decisions, right? You'd present a bunch of judges with the same case, see what sentences they come up with.
Oh, like that study the book talks about where they gave judges fictional cases and their sentences were all over the place.
Exactly. That kind of audit forces us to confront the randomness that we usually just ignore.
Okay, so we've made the noise visible. Now what? How do we actually reduce it? Is there like a way to make our decision-making process less messy?
Well, the book introduces this idea of decision hygiene.
Decision hygiene. What's that? Like washing our hands for our brains.
Pretty much. It's all about developing those mental habits and practices that can help us minimize the influence of noise on our judgments.
Ooh, I like that. So it's like a mental checklist to keep our brains on track.
Exactly.
All right, I'm ready. Tell me everything. What are the key things we need to do to clean up our decision-making?
So we know noise is sneaky, right? Always messing with our judgments. But the good news is we can fight back. We can actually train our brains to make less noisy decisions.
Yeah, you were about to tell us about this decision hygiene thing, right? It's like a mental workout for better judgment.
Exactly. It's all about developing those mental habits that minimize the influence of noise.
So, like, what kind of habits are we talking about here?
Well, one of the most important is resisting those knee-jerk reactions,
Oh, trust your gut, right?
Right. But here's the thing. We tend to overestimate our intuition, especially when we're experts in something.
Oh, totally. I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm talking about.
Exactly. But even seasoned professionals can fall prey to noise. Those gut feelings can be misleading, especially when things get complicated or we're dealing with a lot of emotions.
So how do we fight back against our gut? Do we just, like, ignore it completely?
Not necessarily ignore it, but definitely question it. Don't just blindly trust your gut. Look for data, look for objective evidence to support your intuition, or maybe even challenge it.
Okay, so it's like a checks and balances system for our own brains. I like that. What else can we do to, like, clean up our decision-making?
Well, the book talks a lot about how we frame problems. Even subtle changes in the way we word things or the perspective we take can have a huge impact on our judgments.
Oh, yeah, like those tricky survey questions that try to steer you towards a certain answer.
Exactly. Or think about how news headlines can spin the same event in completely different ways just by changing a few words.
Totally. It's all about how they frame it.
Right. And this framing effect can show up in some pretty high-stakes situations, too. The book gives the example of judges setting bail. They might be more likely to deny bail if they're focused on how dangerous it would be to release the defendant, right?
Yeah, makes sense. Better safe than sorry.
But what if they flipped that perspective? What if they considered the potential injustice of keeping an innocent person locked up?
Oh, wow. That changes the whole equation.
Right. It just shows how important it is to be aware of our own biases and how they can creep into our decisions even when we think we're being completely objective.
Totally. We need to, like, check ourselves before we wreck ourselves.
Exactly. And that's a big part of decision hygiene building systems that promote objectivity and fairness, not just relying on individual habits.
Speaking of systems, the book talks about the Sentencing Reform Act. That was an attempt to make judicial sentencing more consistent, right?
Right. It was designed to reduce the amount of variation in sentencing, but it actually kind of backfired.
Yeah, because the judges didn't really buy into it, right?
Exactly. They felt like their expertise was being undermined, so they resisted the new guidelines.
Which shows that you can't just force these noise reduction strategies on people. You need buy-in from the people who are actually making the decisions.
Absolutely. They need to understand the problem, see the value in the solution, and be a part of the process from the start.
Makes total sense. But what about the rest of us, those of us who aren't judges or making these big decisions? How can we apply these principles in our everyday lives?
That's where this idea of the wisdom of the crowd within comes in. Remember how we talked about averaging multiple judgments to cancel out noise?
Yeah, like getting more perspectives.
Well, you can actually apply that same principle to your own decision-making.
Wait, what?
Mm.
How do I do that? I'm just one person.
It's simpler than you think. Let's say you've got a tough decision to make, right? Instead of just going with your gut reaction, ask yourself the same question multiple times over a few days.
Okay.
Each time you ask, approach it like you're a different person weighing in on the issue.
So it's like I'm having an internal debate with myself.
Exactly. And you might be surprised by how much your answers change. That variation is a sign of noise at work. And by kind of averaging those different perspectives, you can reach a decision that's more balanced, more accurate.
Whoa, so I can be my own wisdom of the crowd.
Yeah.
I love that.
Hmm.
It's like having a built-in noise reduction system.
It is. And it can be really helpful for making those tough calls.
Okay, so we've got a lot of great tools for dealing with noise. But what happens when it's just not practical to do all this? Like, what if it's too complex or it takes too much time to go through all these steps?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the book does acknowledge that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to noise. But even if we can't eliminate it completely, just being aware of it is a huge step in the right direction.
Okay, so awareness is key.
Definitely. If you know noise is a factor, you can be more skeptical of your own judgments and the judgments of others. You can start to question those snap decisions and gut reactions.
So a healthy dose of skepticism can go a long way.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that human judgment isn't perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. But by being aware of noise, we can at least try to minimize those mistakes.
Makes sense. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive,
It has.
and I think we've covered a lot of ground. But before we wrap up this episode completely, let's take a moment to recap the key takeaways from noise and give our listeners some actionable insights they can use in their own lives. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, so noise. It's sneaky, it's everywhere, and it messes with our decisions. But we're not totally helpless against it, right?
Definitely not. We've got tools, we've got strategies, and most importantly, we've got awareness now.
Yeah, that's key. Knowing that noise exists is a big step.
It is. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing it everywhere.
Totally. So just to recap, what were some of those big takeaways from noise?
Well, for me, the biggest one is how much we underestimate the role of randomness in our lives.
Right. We like to think we're in control, but really, there are all these hidden factors influencing our judgments.
Exactly. And that's why this idea of decision hygiene is so important.
Right. Those mental habits that help us make better choices.
Exactly. Things like thinking statistically, resisting those gut reactions, breaking down complex problems.
And being aware of how we're framing things. That was a big one.
Oh, yeah. Framing can totally change the game.
It can. But what about the situations where it's just not realistic to apply all these strategies? Like sometimes life is messy and we don't have time to overthink every little decision?
That's true. And the book does acknowledge that there's no magic bullet for noise.
Right.
But even if we can't eliminate it completely, just being aware of it can make a big difference.
So it's about being more mindful, more deliberate in our decision making.
Exactly. If you know noise is out there, you can be more cautious, more skeptical of your own judgments and the judgments of others.
So basically, don't just blindly trust your gut or anyone else's. Question everything.
Pretty much. It's about acknowledging that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes are just due to random chance, not some big flaw in our reasoning.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better, honestly. It's not always my fault. Sometimes it's just the noise.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of noise. I feel like I've learned so much about how my own brain works and how to make better decisions.
Me too. And I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so too. And if you want to explore this topic even further, definitely check out the full book, Noise by Kahneman, Sibony, and Sunstein. It's packed with insights and practical advice.
It's a great read.
It is. All right, that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, stay curious out there